today I want to walk you through a couple of different topics related to budgets. We're going to look at flexible budgets, standard budgets, and also what these variances create and how to analyze the variances. So there's a lot of definitions to know. Make sure you understand what each of these mean. I want to make sure when you're going and looking at the variances, a favorable variance, this means what happened was good. Too many times students try to associate a negative or a positive number to the favorable and unfavorable variances. I really want you to get away from that. I want you to analyze and look at what actually happened. Did I spend less money than I did that I thought I was going to? Or did I use less hours than thought I was going to have to? That would be a good favorable variance. Compared to the bad, what happened? Was it not so good, right? So did I use more hours than I thought I should have? Did I spend more money? So again, what I really want here is for you to get away from those negative and positive numbers and to really look at what happened in the situation. We're going to focus on building a flexible budget today. And a flexible budget, all that does is adjust your activity level. So at the activity level, if I could spell, the activity level adjusts to actual. So we're going to go through an example of what that looks like and how to build that. There are some shortcuts that I want to make sure you're aware of. It just saves you some time. When we're looking at a price variance, we're going to take our actual quantity and we're going to multiply that by our actual price minus our standard price. And when we're looking at efficiency variance, we're going to take our standard price and we're going to multiply that by our actual quantity minus our standard quantity. Because when we're looking at efficiency, we're looking at the quantity used. When we're looking at price, we should know that we're looking at the difference in prices. So if we wanted to get those total variances, then these are our kind of shortcut equations. But I'm going to show you where those come from. First, I start with my actual, which is actual quantity times actual price. Then I'm going to look at my actual input at standard prices. And I'm going to compare those. This is actual quantity times standard price. And finally, I'm going to look at that standard. This is where that flexible budget's coming from, where I take my standard quantity times my standard price. And so now I'm going to show you where all of these equations are coming from. And just as a reminder, actual AQ is actual quantity. AP is actual price. And same thing over here. SQ in my abbreviations is standard quantity. And SP is looking at standard price. Helpful to know. So what I'm going to do is bring all of this down and show you where these variances are coming in. So my price variance is looking at what do I have in common between the two of these. So I'm starting with actual, bringing that down, then looking at the actual piece and the actual at standard piece and combining those to come up with my price variance. The piece I have in common is that actual quantity. So I take that actual quantity out and I'm going to multiply that by actual price minus standard price, my other two variants. I'm going to do the same thing on this other side. I'm starting with my standard, and I'm going to bring those down, look at my actual at standard, bring that down, and I'm going to then create that equation out of those two. I find that common factor. Here the common factor is standard price. So I take that standard price out and I'm going to multiply that by the difference in my quantities. And this again is my efficiency variance. And once again, if I combine my price variance and my efficiency variance, that's going to equal my total variance. I can also get my total variance by looking at the difference between my actual and my standard. Try this again. So my total variance is comparing my two outside columns, actual versus standard, to get that total variance. So let's take a look at really how this is working out in our problems when they give us numbers and they give us everything we have to compute. So remember, when I'm trying to figure out what my flexible budget is, it's your actual outcome at standard prices. So when I look at problems and they're giving me a lot of information, I'm going to go through and just kind of highlight what I need to know. So first, I'm going to look for my standard. So what I highlight green will be my standard. What I highlight in pink will be my actual. Just so I can keep everything separate. Going to be definitely necessary when problems get longer. So first, let's look for those standard numbers. Last period called for sales at $225 at $9 each. That was the master budget. And it says the costs were estimated to be $375. So these are my standard prices. And they gave us that fixed cost. Continue reading through. It tells me that actual production was 230 units at $910, and variable costs were actually $450. Again, I forgot to include those units there in the standard, what was expected. So the first thing we want to do is look at that sales activity and build the flexible budget in, build that master budget in. And since we're combining sales, we're building this flexible budget based on the we're building this flexible budget based on actual activity. So that 230,000 units. But we're going to use those standard prices. Our master budget, because we're looking at a sales variance, is going to be based on what we thought we were going to sell. So let's take a look at how to do this. Again, that flexible budget is based on 230,000. The master budget, what we built originally, was based on 225,000 units at standard prices. So my sales will come in first. I'll subtract those variable costs. That's going to equal my contribution margin. I subtract my fixed costs, and it's going to equal my profit. So let's build that flexible budget. For my sales, I'm looking at those 230,000 units times standard prices, which gives me 2,070,000. Variable costs, I'm using that 375, so 230 times 375, which is 862. If I subtract those two, you get 1,207,500. Subtract those fixed costs, which they give me, to get down to my profit. 982. Then I'm going to build that master budget out. But remember, this is based on 225, but at those standard prices. Same thing with the variable cost. $750. Subtract those to get to my contribution margin. Bring in those fixed costs to get down to my profit. So now what I'm going to do is go through and see what that sales activity variance is. So I'm taking my master budget, subtracting that flexible budget. So for that first one, I would take the 2,070,000 versus the 2,025,000. The difference is 45,000. Now, my flexible budget and comparing my master budget, I want a higher sales. I have a higher sales, so that's a good thing. I'm going to say that's favorable. When I look at my variable costs, I'm just subtracting the two. The difference comes to 18,750. My variable costs are higher, therefore it's unfavorable. Contribution margin, again, same thing, subtract those two. I want a high contribution margin. I have a higher one. That's a good thing. That's favorable. There's no difference here, giving me that total difference of 226,250. Favorable. So now what I'm going to do is look at a profit variance. I think this should say profit. That profit variance analysis, which what happens here is I'm going to bring in my flexible budget, over here, all those same numbers. Just bringing all the numbers down that I just built. Oops, that's an 8. I'm still comparing my sales minus my variable costs equals my contribution minus my fixed to give me my profit. So now, when I look at the actual budget, remember I'm looking for those pink numbers. So when I build this out, I'm using my actual sales at actual prices. So that first number, sales, would be 230 times 910, which is going to give me $2,093,000. Those variable costs again are 230, but I'm using my actual, which is 450, giving me a variable cost of 1.35, which gives me that contribution margin of 1058. My fixed costs haven't changed. They would give you that information, and I subtract those to get to my profit. Oh. I didn't read all the way through there. So here I'm going to go through, look at this sales variance versus the manufacturing variance, and determine if those differences are favorable or unfavorable. Again, here for the sales piece, I'm comparing, because it's sales, it goes into the sales variance piece, and I'm going to, again, just subtract the two. 2093 minus 2070. This falls into the sales variance. My sales were higher, that's a good thing, so that's going to be favorable. My variable costs go into a manufacturing variance. I'm just going to subtract those two. I'm going to look. I don't want to spend more money, so this is going to be unfavorable. My contribution margin brings both of these down. My fixed costs, I have nothing because there's no difference. And then we are just bringing those variances down, so we can kind of tell where they're both coming from. Let's go ahead and try another problem. In this problem, again, a lot of words to look through. We're going to go through, pull out what we need, and then do the problem. This is going to save you a lot of time to kind of just, and make it a lot more organized, rather than trying to find all of the pieces that you need at a certain time. So I'm going to take a few minutes here. I'm going to build a chart out that will help me find all the pieces of these equations that I need. As you can see, I cannot draw a straight line. So that when I'm doing these problems, it's going to be a quick, find what I need, put it in the equation, and save me some time. So again, I'm looking for actual quantity, actual price, standard quantity, standard price. And I'm going to have to find these from a direct material perspective, a direct labor perspective, and an overhead perspective. Remember, overhead here, if we read through, it's going to tell us that overhead is based on hours. So I should recognize that, and then after we have this chart all figured out, what we need to know, it's going to be a lot easier to do this problem. So now we have to actually read through the problem. They prepare a budget based on standard cost, responsibility reports prepared monthly, and they want us to analyze these variances that they have. So they give us all those standard information, and then they give us the actual cost for the month. So now let's go ahead with this information, build the chart we need. So actual, let's start there. So I'm going to find actual costs. I know I'm going to that chart. I'm going to look for my actual quantity used. They give me that. My actual price, again, they give me that. The standard quantity, this I'm going to have to figure out based on actual units produced. So I actually produced 2,280. It should take me 6 gallons per unit. I'll multiply that by 6, and I get 13,680. My standard price for materials, they give me $2. Now let's look at the direct labor. If I'm looking for actual, it tells me I worked 6,400 hours. My actual price was 40. I'm finding all this in my actual data. Then I'm going to look to the standard to find that standard information. Again, but standard is going to be based on actual output. So I take that 280 or 2280 and times that by 3 to give me the hours it should have taken. And then for the standard price, they just give that to me, that 36. Now let's look at overhead. For actual quantity, it's going to be, let's look through this, based on labor hours, so 6,400. The actual price, if I'm going to bring that into a price that's comparable, I'm taking my total cost, dividing that by hours, which would give me $9.49. My standard quantity, again, is based on hours, on labor hours. And if I look for standard price for overhead, it's going to be based on, they tell us 25% of direct labor. So I'm going to take that 36 times 25%, which gives me $9. And then you can kind of go through and compare. Make sure that these are all comparable before we start doing the math. Look at my price versus price. Those are kind of comparable, so I know they're probably right. Same thing here. My prices are okay. Quantities are at least within the realm of being consistent. Something you should look for. So now we can go ahead and find our price and efficiency variances. So for price, I'm going to pull in my equations. And for direct materials, I'm going to take my actual quantity and look at the difference in price, which is 3024. And that's going to be favorable because I spent less than I thought I was going to. Then I'm going to look at my direct labor, bring in that actual quantity, compare the prices. This is unfavorable. And then I look at overhead, which is based on those same hours, but I'm looking at those prices that I figured out. Now let's figure out with our, let's do this in a different color so it stands out a little bit more. Let's figure out our efficiency variances. And direct materials. I know I'm going to take that standard price and compare my quantities. This is going to give me a difference of 2880. That's unfavorable if I just look at the quantity I used. For direct labor, again, I'm going to take that standard and compare those hours, which gives me a total of 15,840. This is favorable because I'm looking at those hours. I use less than I should have. And finally, the overhead, where I'm going to take that $9 and compare those hours again. Which gives me a 3960 favorable variance. So now what I want to do is just take a look at my total. And I'm going to compare my price and my efficiency variances. If I combine these two, and one's favorable, one's unfavorable, the combination would give me $144 favorable variance. Same thing here, compare my two direct labor variances, and my total labor variance should be 9760. Unfavorable, since that one's higher. Same thing here, and this is 810 favorable. So it takes a lot of time to do these problems, but again, if we build that chart out, it's going to save you time and hopefully prevent a simple mistake. Let's just go ahead and do one more, an easier one that we can get through looking at our overhead variances. In our overhead rates, again, price, the hardest part is like reading through this, pulling out that information you need. And we're going to look at our price variance. In overhead is just your actual minus your budgeted amount. So all I'm looking at is pulling those numbers in, 760 versus 770. That's a $10 difference, or $10,000 difference. Trying to eliminate it, writing so many zeros. And now we have to figure out if it's favorable or not. We actually paid less than we thought we were going to, so that's favorable. Our volume variance, this is typically unfavorable That's just looking at the capacity used and are we operating at full capacity? Normally we are not. So first step is to find your applied. To do that, we're going to take our units and multiply that by the rate they give us, just 759. Then I'm going to look at the difference between applied minus my budgeted. So I take 759, subtract that 770, that's 11,000 unfavorable. And finally, to get that total variance, I'm just going to combine those two, just like we did in that problem before. I have a $10,000 favorable and 11,000 unfavorable, which gives me a $1,000 unfavorable total variance. So hopefully that helps get you started in this. Please, again, always ask questions if you need help.